I became a UFO expert, but not on purpose. I was an amateur astronomer before I became a professional astronomer. So every university where I served, they said, you have to handle all the UFO reports. And about 99% of what people would report to me as UFOs, I could explain as natural phenomena, a hoax, or secret government military activity. But there's a 1% residual that falls in a different category. And these would be UFO phenomena that observers report violating the laws of physics. On the other hand, they leave evidence indicating that they're real phenomena. And that, I think, explains why you have a lot of scientists and skeptics saying this doesn't exist, because they come from a worldview that doesn't permit the existence of non-physical reality. But as a Christian, as a believer in the inerrancy of the Bible, I do believe in the existence of non-physical reality.
I think there's a deception coming upon the planet Earth that's going to profoundly affect everyone, including the body of Christ. We're going to attempt to explore the truth behind the UFO phenomenon. All of us, I think, are sensitive to the fact there's been a lot in the news.
What would happen to people's faith if there was proof, genuine proof, really incontrovertible proof of an extraterrestrial reality? What would that really change for people? Could Christianity really accommodate a genuine extraterrestrial reality or disclosure? The question is actually pretty old, even though we kind of think that it might be a modern one because, space travel, the whole question of, aliens and alien visitation seems to be new to us. But it actually goes back centuries and even millennia.
These are issues that most of us as Christians are really ill-equipped to even deal with philosophically. Is there life in space? Well, we don't know. And yet the question is it sinless? That raises some interesting theological problems. Or is it sinful? That raises some other problems. See, you do need to understand the New Agers are going to have a field day with this.
It really would cause problems with certain Christians if there was a genuine ET reality, but it doesn't have to.
All of us, I think, are aware that there's this whole issue of UFOs are in the news. Are UFOs real or not? Where are they from? Were they also around in the past? What does the Bible say about them? And what's their agenda? Are they friendly or hostile?
There were very serious theologians, very serious Christians that had no problem with this proposition that there could be extraterrestrials. And they had good reasons for doing so. It didn't harm the biblical text for them. It didn't endorse a different theory of creation other than what the Bible had in its pages. It didn't harm the atonement. It didn't harm the image of God. And it wasn't equated with demons. How did they think through this issue and not fall prey to any of these fears?
Are they real? Now, the problem in this area, if you research it at all, is there's so much information that's uncorroborated, unreliable, deliberate hoaxes. There's also substantial budgets, apparently, for disinformation in this area, both pro and con. On the other hand, when you strip away all of that, you discover there's much, in fact too much to ignore, that is substantiated, involving multiple competent witnesses. They have been plotted on radar.
There was one major event that happened in the 19th century that sort of soured the church's opinion when it came to extraterrestrial life. And that event sort of became what it was going to be because of certain things in the 20th century. So in the 19th and 20th century, there were a few things that happened that really sort of account for the present suspicion or fear of many in the church toward the whole question of extraterrestrial life. In the 19th century, the key event was the advent of Darwinism. Of course, Darwin published The Origin of Species in 1859, and that ushered in this new thing that we call evolution, a whole different version of human origins. Now, Darwinism itself really doesn't have, or didn't have, I should say, any impact on the whole question of other worlds, but it was going to. Because in the 20th century, the idea of life elsewhere in space, other worlds, began to sort of get married to Darwinism. That is, since people were predisposed to think that life on Earth was the result of random, directionless evolution, the thinking, went in the direction of, well, if we find life somewhere else, then life evolved somewhere else just like it did here. And so the pursuit of extraterrestrial life, or at least evidence for it, began to be viewed by some in the scientific community as a means by which we would sort of prove evolution and disprove creationism altogether once and for all.
The problem with UFOs is, on the one hand, we find them reported by multiple competent witnesses. They plot on radar. They leave tangible evidences on the ground, radiation and burns and other things. They're photographed. On the other hand, they're clocked at speeds of over 6,000 miles per hour without generating sonic booms. They make right-angle turns at incredible speeds, which imply that they're free of mass, as we would understand it. But here's the most disturbing thing of all. Frequent reports indicate they appear to materialize and dematerialize without any other traces. So on the one hand, they're real. On the other hand, they don't seem to be real. Hallucinations do not plot on radar.
The Bible tells us God created two different species of intelligent life, one that's constrained by the physics of the universe and one that is not. And we're talking about humans that are indeed constrained by the dimensions and laws of physics of the universe, and angels who are not. And these angels live in a different dimensional realm, but God has given them the power to come in temporarily into our realm. So I think that's where that 1% residual falls. And some of the strongest evidence for that is that where you got multiple observers tracking a UFO going through the atmosphere, which means we can actually calculate its trajectory and velocity. And the velocities often run between 5 and 25,000 miles per hour. But the observers never record the occurrence of a sonic boom or a heat friction trail behind the UFO. If it was a physical object, you would get a sonic boom. You would get a heat friction trail, just like you do when one of the spaceships go through our atmosphere from the International Space Station. However, there are a couple of thousand cases documented where the UFO not only goes through our atmosphere, it crashes into the Earth. And when you go to the crash site, you see a crater. The snow is melted. The vegetation is consistently damaged. But as you investigate that crater site, there's never any debris. There's no artifacts. If it was a physical craft crashing into the Earth, you'd be able to recover some debris and artifacts. But the fact that you see a crater and melted snow and damaged vegetation means that something real caused that. So we're dealing with non-physical reality, or what the French astrophysicist Jacques Vallée referred to. He says, we're dealing with interdimensional phenomena. I mean, he's not a believer, but that was his conclusion. We're dealing with a phenomena that's operating in dimensions different than those of the universe.
In the 50s and the 60s, there's something that historians would call the contactee movement or the contactee phenomenon. And this is the era when you get lots of stories of people who claim to have seen not only things in the sky that they couldn't identify, again, UFOs, but also claiming to actually have been contacted by the occupants of those flying saucers, those UFOs. Hence, contactee movement. And what really sort of affected the way Christians thought about the whole UFO, the whole alien question in regard to the 50s and the 60s and the contactee movement was the messaging. The contactees, were supposedly told by extraterrestrials that, Jesus was one of them. Lots of Christian ideas were hijacked and sort of reformulated into space talk. Lots of New Age kind of thinking, at least that's the way we would term it today. And that really turned a lot of people off toward the idea of there being other worlds and extraterrestrial life.
It's simply not possible for a physical craft to travel through interstellar space. At least not a craft of significant small size. I mean, for example, astronomers are interested in sending spaceships to the nearest planet outside of our solar system. It's only 4.2 light years away. But they realize as these spaceships travel through space, they'll encounter electrons, protons, helium nuclei, tiny pieces of dust. And this will destroy the craft, and the greater the size of the craft, the greater the destruction. But there's no way you're going to send a termite across interstellar space, or even a microbe, let alone something the size of a human being. And so the idea that these things in hangars in different places, no, it's way too small to bring beings across interstellar space.
Now, most of the experts that have researched this, competent scientists that have researched this area, have come to the conclusion that they are not from some other galaxy. That's a popular myth and fanned in the fiction. And there are many people that really believe that they're from some other constellation, what have you, because they pretend to be. Most of the competent researchers, J. Allen Hynek of the United States, who died a few years ago, and also Jacques Vallée from France, have come to the conclusion that they are from another dimension within our own. One of the questions that serious scientists are dealing with is they tend to believe that these UFOs appear to be real, but able somehow to enter our dimensionality from another dimension.
The alien abduction phenomenon that followed on the heels of the contactee phenomenon also did the same thing. People were actually physically harmed, or at least they alleged they had been harmed in these experiences where they were not only contacted by beings they thought were aliens, but the aliens would do all sorts of things to them. Some of them quite nasty. Sexual violation, lots of things that in other contexts you would think are very overtly demonic. Satanic even. This naturally led to Christians having a very low view of the whole question. Again, this whole phenomenon.
There are a continuing deluge of cases being reported that are too weird, too bizarre to accept, but they're too frequent and too consistent to ignore. Estimates have been published from 1 to 3% of the population believe they're involved in such things. You're talking about millions of people, not a few wackos on the fringe of normal behavior. When you study these reports, you also discover that virtually all of them involve in some way the implanting or harvesting of human fetuses, the collection of sperm, the collection of eggs, and what have you. Strange, weird stuff.
Lastly, the whole ancient astronaut phenomenon really deserves some attention here, because not only was the idea sort of popular that there were aliens and they had contacted some people and maybe abducted people and did awful things to them, but now, according to ancient astronaut theory, they had been here in antiquity and they'd raised up our great religious leaders, Muhammad and Jesus and Buddha. They were either taught by aliens or were the offspring of aliens or were aliens or something like that.
Scholars raise the question, who built the ancient monuments, the giant pyramid at Giza? The more you study the Great Pyramid, the more difficult it becomes. We could not do it today without laser alignment. It's aligned more precisely than the Paris Observatory. These 200-ton stones, etc. We don't have the equipment today. It would take only very special equipment to even handle these things. The Stonehenge in Britain has its own mysteries. The face on the planet Mars always comes up in these discussions.
Extraterrestrials had come here and built the pyramids. They'd given us Western civilization, even created humanity. All these narratives became, sort of part of the popular discourse in the 70s through books like Chariots of the Gods by Erich von Däniken or the works of Zecharia Sitchin. All of these things sort of run together. Contactee movement, alien abduction phenomenon, the ancient astronaut idea, to really making Christians predisposed to rejecting the whole question of whether there could be other worlds. Again, something in the Christian past that had been embraced. It was a consensus, and it was positive.
So we're moving into an area that I believe is a cosmic deception coming up on the planet Earth that has many dimensions. Now remember, the warfare that you and I are involved in started in Genesis 3, when God took the initiative, declared war against Satan, He said, I'll put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed, and he shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. God addressing Satan, the serpent, the Nahash, the shining one of Genesis 3. That means there's a conflict of two seeds. Now, the first seed, we know, the seed of the woman. It becomes a title of Jesus Christ. It's a contradiction in biology and grammar. The seed of the woman. The seed of the man, no. The seed of the woman is a hint of the virgin birth back in Genesis 3, verse 15, confirmed in Isaiah 7:14, and of course, is one of your primary titles of the Messiah throughout prophetic scripture. But there's another seed alluded to in Genesis 3:15, the seed of the serpent. And we see three personages that emerge, especially in the book of Revelation and elsewhere. The red dragon, or Satan, as he's described in Revelation 12. The coming world leader, as I call him. We like to call him the Antichrist, but that's an ambiguous term for several reasons. But there's a coming political leader and a false prophet. And these forces are behind the world even today.
But what's interesting about these close encounters, it's never beneficial. It's always deleterious. The best you're going to come away from with one of these encounters is recurring, terrifying nightmares. Worst case scenario, you get killed. So they're harmful, but there's also evidence that there's deception involved in these encounters.
Now, for myself, I would say that it just doesn't have to be this way. We have, I think, to make a separation between the question of could there be other alien life forms out there and all of this other stuff, what people allege to, have been contacted by aliens or abducted by aliens. I think the better way to process those things is not alien life, but some kind of malevolent, sinister, demonic, spiritual phenomenon that's happening. In other words, they're not extraterrestrials.
Now, there is a coming deception. Jesus emphasized that. He said there'll be false Christs and false prophets that shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they should deceive the very elect. If your faith is based on miracles, on signs and wonders, however exciting they may be, you are on shaky ground because they can and will be counterfeit. Your faith needs to be built on the Word of God. The minute you start seeking experience as a basis, you're opening yourself up to the possibility of being deceived.
And then you've got those cases where the human contactee goes into a trance, and then they begin to type out what the UFO being wants them to communicate. I mean, probably the most dramatic example would be a big book, the Urantia book. It's kind of the Bible for all these UFO cults. And some editions run 4,000 pages. The entire book was communicated through automatic writing. But what's interesting about the Urantia book, about a third of its content denies the deity of Jesus Christ. So there, I think you can see the deceptive motivation behind this UFO phenomena.
Alleged contactee situations where people think they've been contacted by aliens and given lots of information that is frankly very anti-Christian. I'm also talking about alien abduction narratives. Again, whatever is happening to people or whatever they think is happening to them, again, is very sinister, very evil, very violent, and really, sort of undermines, any sort of confidence that the question of extraterrestrial life is something that Christians could be positive about. Because if these are aliens and aliens are doing all this nasty stuff, we don't want any part of that. It's obviously demonic and satanic.
Don't forget who our warfare is with. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness in this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places, with ranks of angels.
That we have a scientific, testable model for this UFO phenomena. Because what you notice in these close encounters, it's exclusively experienced by people who have significant involvement in the occult. And when you remove that occult factor, that's the end of the UFO encounters. Increase the degree of occult, you increase the frequency of these UFO encounters. You notice there's a much higher incidence of these close encounters in nations where there's a high incidence of occult involvement. Examples would be France, Equatorial Brazil. Close all the doors to occult involvement in your life and the life of your close relatives. That'll be the end of your UFO encounters.
My thinking is those are two actually different and competing things. The question of whether there could be aliens, whether there could be extraterrestrials, is a lot different than asking the question, hey, these stories about contact and these stories about abduction, are those aliens or something else? They're actually two distinct arenas. In fact, if you actually talk to people who are not Christians, they could be atheists or anything else, but they're into UFO research, a lot of those people don't want anything to do with the contactee movement or the alien abduction movement. For the same reasons, they think it's ridiculous. They think that either people are imagining these things or inventing them. Some will say, well, maybe there are things like demons and this is what's happening here, but these are not aliens. These are not extraterrestrials. We should not mix these things up. But unfortunately, those things do get mixed.
What do I do about that? Now, what is your remedy if indeed you find yourself in some kind of bizarre encounter? What do you do? Well, your refuge is not in Genesis 6, it's in Ephesians 6. I don't have the time to develop this, but I want to challenge everyone in this room. When you get home, if you can wait that long, do a serious study of Ephesians chapter 6. Find out what the armor of God is. Paul tells you twice, put on the whole armor of God. Not your favorite pieces, the whole armor. Gird yourself with truth. Find out what that means. Put on the breastplate of righteousness. Whose righteousness? Better not be yours. Find out what that means. Have your feet shod with preparation. Now, preparation is what you do before the battle, but you're already in the battle. You're onto enemy turf today. You got to do your homework. And what is the shield of faith? When a Roman soldier repaired his shield, it had holes in it. When did he repair it? Not during the battle, beforehand. Does your shield of faith have holes in it? If there's holes in your faith, don't wait for them to be challenged. Identify them and get the answers you need right now. Do your homework. And understand your helmet of salvation. Owning it ain't enough. You need to wear it. And the sword of the Spirit, Word of God. And of course, your heavy artillery is prayer. And I encourage every one of you to take that seriously. It's so convenient. You and I have a hotline directly to the throne room of the universe.
Close the doors, and that will deliver you from these horrifying experiences. And also be careful about who you are in contact with. Like if your father's involved, that could be the demon can work through that. And keep in mind, these fallen angels can take whatever form they choose. They can appear as your dead grandfather. They can appear as a flying saucer. They can appear as a leprechaun. And so that's why it tells us in 1 John, test the spirits. Don't believe every supernatural being that approaches you. Put them to the test.
Now again, what I want to focus on and what I try to focus on is, on the one hand, if you're talking about alien abduction, again, whatever people think that is, whatever it might be, either real or imaginary, that's very obviously sinister. It's very obviously dark because of what happens to people and the way it affects them in their life. If we're talking about ancient astronauts, again, I think the proposition of ancient aliens being the explanation for things like the pyramids and the world's religions, I think it's patently absurd. As a text scholar, when it comes to the Bible especially, again, I can say it's absurd and an abuse of the biblical text.
I want you to visualize this as a three-dimensional diagram. This curved line through is, I'm going to call time. You and I are in linear time, but God is outside time. Back there in the past, we have them. People of the past, Adam and you name it. We're up here in the present. From the throne room of the universe, he obviously can look into time and see the predicament of those in the past, Adam and following. He can also see us right now where we are today. But being outside time, but transcendent of time and space, God himself could enter time. He could actually go back through time in that sense, you see, not to change it, but to fulfill it. And of course, we all know what happened 2,000 years ago.
We live in a world where the social political systems are becoming more polarized. That's also happening in a spiritual level. Yes, I could see how people are moving away from God and get discouraged, but I also see something else happening. People around the world hungering for spiritual truth.
Could there be extraterrestrials somewhere out there? Is there an inherent theological problem with that? In principle, no. And I want to explain why I think that way, why we have a lot of illegitimate fears when it comes to the bigger question. Could there be extraterrestrials out there somewhere? Would our faith be intact if there were? I think it would be intact, and we don't need to fear some of these connections that have been made to this issue. Demons, the whole question of it undermines Jesus' atonement. It endorses evolution. Again, it harms the Bible in some way. These things are not legitimate fears. And so we need to sort of unpack why that's the case and how to think a little bit better as Christians about this issue, because, hey, somewhere down the road, we might actually find out that there is life elsewhere, and our faith doesn't need to crumble.
You and I are the beneficiaries of a love story that was written in blood on a wooden cross that was erected in Judea some 2,000 years ago, that settles the conflict that's forthcoming. We've read ahead, we've read the last chapter, we know who wins.